afternoon. Our next speaker, Joe McMoneagle, comes to us with 35 plus years in research and development in technical systems, the paranormal, and social sciences. He is currently the owner and the director of the Intuitive Intelligence Applications Incorporated, which has supplied research and development on remote viewing to various agencies. He is the author of multiple books, including Mind Trek, Ultimate Time Machine, and the Stargate Chronicles, just to name a few. Here to speak about how will full contact impact our society, let me welcome Joe McMoneagle.
Hello, everyone. Hope we have that under control. I'm here to talk about full contact, but in order to do that, I need to talk a little bit about remote viewing first. I can't assume that everybody in the room knows what real remote viewing is all about, so we'll do that. What is remote viewing? Well, remote viewing is a little bit different from psychic functioning. Psychic functioning is when someone may brush up against someone and know something, or they're reading an article in the newspaper and a bit of information will flash into their mind that's connected in some way to that subject. It's sort of an instantaneous knowing. Remote viewing is a little bit different in that remote viewing is the ability to describe something remotely that you have absolutely no access to in any way, shape, or form. One of the things about remote viewing that's different from psychic functioning is the remote viewer is always in a room which is sealed and has they have no means of accessing any of the information in any way, shape, or form. There are two requirements that make remote viewing what it is. The first is that all persons present in a remote viewing are equally blind to the target. And equally blind means at least double blind. So they also have no access to the target. One of the reasons for this, well, there's a multitude of reasons, but one of the most important reasons is we've discovered through science, the investigation with science, that psychics do read people in a cold reading fashion. In other words, human beings communicate one with the other, not just verbally. We communicate, about 70% of our communications are nonverbal, or with the way we hold our hands, disbelief, interest, that sort of thing. And so just from a cold reading, someone can tell you things that may be a little bit better or a little bit worse about the subject at hand. So everyone within the room has to be totally blind to the target. I'm using target now to indicate what we're trying to get information about. The second reason, probably the most important, is from scientific study. We also know that all human beings on the planet are psychic. Everybody is. You don't have any choice in that matter. Being psychic, or being able to produce information about something you have no direct access to, is actually an old talent. It's regressive. It goes back perhaps 50,000 years or longer. It has to do with the survival of our species. People react in a psychic way when they have no other ability to produce information. So if you go back 50,000 years and you're living in a cave and you come back from the big hunt and there's 3 possible places to sleep, you will intuitively know it's safer to sleep in one of the caves versus the other 2 because that's the 2 that the cave bears may be coming back to. It's the reason we're all still here today. Is because of our ability to know something without formal training or having direct access to it. Which means that anyone in the room with the remote viewer is equally psychic, so inevitably, and we found this to be true thousands of times literally, they will ask exactly the right question at exactly the right time. The other reason is there has to be a means of, in remote viewing, we always like to have a means of validating information or knowing when the information is correct. So obviously remote viewing is probably not very good at the very topic we're going to discuss today, because there's no way of truly validating the information. If a remote viewer talks about bases on the dark side of the moon, it's going to be very difficult for the remote viewer to to prove that beyond a shadow of a doubt. So all the remote viewing that I might have participated in, or no remote viewers that have participated in, or all the information I'm going to provide today is not actually validated. So you have to take everything I say with a grain of salt and allow your personal belief or your personal faith to guide you in how much value you associate to it. In most cases, all human beings give value to things. We're with friends, and they're good friends, and they tell us something about something we don't know anything about. We'll give that perhaps a higher value than normal simply because they're our friends. If you're with somebody you really don't like and you don't trust, and they tell you the sky's blue, you might not believe them. So remote viewing has to do about faith when you don't have a form or means of validating the information. So if you have to be double blind, how are you going to select your own targets? That's a pretty tough thing to do. If I select my own targets, I'm automatically thinking about them, and I know about them, so I'm front-loaded, and I also have this problem with being overwhelmed with data that I read or perceived or talked with someone about or have any inclination to believe. So the best way to do a remote viewing is to remote view a target you have no knowledge about. And the only way to do that, if you're going to set up your own targets, is a little methodology that I devised. Basically, it works like this. You take a 3x5 card and you put a question in it. The question might be something very general, like or specific, like describe the interior of a craft or describe something about the UFO when you have a possible UFO event location. That in itself is difficult. If you have the possibility of selecting 3 targets out of 10,000, how do you know the 3 you selected are absolutely alien targets or UFO targets and not something we've misidentified as an alien target? So there are ways of doing that. I'm not going to go into those, but eventually you'll find 2 or 3 that are more than likely 99.9% alien targets. So those are the ones you choose to use. You'll put your question on a 3x5 card inside a double-wrapped or opaque envelope that you can't see through. Now the problem is, you now have a sealed envelope, but you still know the contents to it. So it's still not a targetable item. But you can take the target and you can put an ID code on it if you want. I personally don't like IDing the specific target, particularly if I made it myself. So usually when I create a target for myself, I leave the envelope blank. What I do is I put that target in a green leaf bag with about 300 other targets, or another 100 targets, or another 50 targets, so that no matter what I'm pulling out of the leaf bag, I have no idea what it is I'm working on. And you never put all your UFO targets in the same bag. You may put other targets of interest, like how was the Great Pyramid constructed, or things like that. So you're never knowing what you're pulling out of the bag. And that's how you can target yourself and not know what it is you're working on. You can have someone else put your targets together. Generally, it should be somebody that has an idea of how remote viewing works and the specifics of it. Remote viewing is driven by intention and expectation for results. So if your intention is to know where an alien might be coming from, you don't want to ask about the interior of their ship or wonder about how they look, because your intention has to be a pure and clear one. Anyone involved in the creation of the target or the event of remote viewing itself must also share a very clear and clean intention of what's happening or what your expectation for outcome is. If one person expects to have a description of an alien and the other person wants to have an explanation of where the ship came from, you already have a split intention and expectation for outcome, and you're liable to get a less than 50% result. So don't forget to use opaque envelopes. Everybody has the urge to hold it up against the light or try to put it up against the window and look through it. Everybody wants to cheat a little bit. You don't want to cheat. There's a very big reason why, which I'll tell you in a second. And you don't want to discuss the target the entire time you're working on it. Let's say you get a little bit of information on a Monday afternoon. Well, throw it on the desk or throw it on the side of the computer and wait a few days and work it again. See what else happens. Sometimes you get additional information. If the person you're providing the information to gets the initial information you give them, they may come back and say, oh, tell me a little bit more about what you said here. They won't tell you what you said right or wrong, but they may say, your comment about looking like a water tank is interesting. Please expand on that. Well, if you know what the target is because you open the envelope, it's too late. When the target turns out to be exactly what you described, you're going to feel really good about yourself. But if you cheated, you'll never know whether or not it was psychic information. The project Stargate, a lot of people believe that Stargate was the name of our project, our remote viewing project. In fact, I'm going to give a very brief and quick history. The project was originally named Gondola Wish. It was a study project. It was only supposed to last 3 years. The first year we were going to select and train, and we didn't know at the time what training included or meant, but we were going to select and train, I believe it was 3 psychics from the Army Intelligence Unit. These 3 psychics would spend a year learning what remote viewing was and all the ramifications of what they had to do remote viewing. And then in the second year, they were going to be turned loose in the world, and they would operate exactly as a Russian agent. And as a Russian agent that they would be emulating, they would target places like the Pentagon, CIA, FBI building, or the White House, for instance. And after a year of collecting data, they would bring the data in out of the cold, so to speak, and we would turn all of this data over to the National Security Agency or the Defense Intelligence Agency, and they would do an independent, blind evaluation of the data and compare it to the actuality of the data that we said we collected. And based on that result, they would file a formal report saying, this is probably how good the Russian psychics are doing. So the whole idea was to try to determine the accuracy and the ability of the Russian psychics. We knew the Russians were using psychics to target our agencies. We just didn't know how good they were. The problem was, initially, we wound up finding 6 very good psychics instead of 3. As a result, 6 were sent to SRI International. I happened to be the first one sent there, and I was tested by being run through 6 double-blind remote viewings. I had never heard of remote viewing when I got to SRI International, so I was a little bit miffed at what I had to do. They put me in a sealed windowless room. They gave me a picture of an individual and said, please describe in detail or draw exactly where this person's standing. It turned out I had 5 perfect results and 1 near perfect, so I got volunteered for the project. I was remote viewer 001 because I was the first one selected, and when they went to name the next guy 002, they knew that if they gave him 2, they'd be telling everybody how many remote viewers they had, so he got 385. So I'm the only remote viewer authorized to kill. No, I meant the only one with the 00 number, which is absolutely, and the number 1 remote viewer, which is absolutely meaningless because the other 5 were equally as good as I was, it turned out. The possibility of 5 perfect matches happening by chance was exactly the number you heard from Story yesterday for the numbers of intelligent entities on possible planet circling stars, which is 1 in 10 to the minus 24. So there are equal number of possible intelligent species as there are my ability to violate that by chance. After being recruited, we began our training period. And our training period was actually doing one remote viewing after another, 3 or 4 a day, for a period of months. When I initially started, I had this tremendous success, is why I was recruited. When I started doing the training sessions, I had 24 straight failures. I was beginning to think, maybe this was bogus to start with. In actuality, right after my 24th failure, I was awakened that night and taken to an out-of-the-way place. It was a war room in a basement somewhere in Washington. And I and a lieutenant colonel, who was also a remote viewer, were given over 500 photographs and told that an embassy had been taken over somewhere in the world, and they needed to know who was a hostage and who wasn't. Will we please nail the pictures to the wall of the actual hostages? We were able to produce 61 photos, but we also had to do 3 sketches because 3 of the hostages were CIA agents, and we had no photos of them. It turned out that we were, if not 100%, within 1 photo of being 100%. The Gondola Wish project died that night, and Grill Flame began sometime that week. Grill Flame is the operational version of the study project. It was nice being in the study project because we had perfect deniability. If someone said, you're not really going to be a psychic working for the government, I could say, oh, no, I'm pretending to be a Russian psychic working for the government, and in 3 years I'll be a normal guy again, and we all know that being psychic is nuts. It also gave great deniability to our supporters, which were some very powerful senators and congressmen and some scientists that we had in our government. As it turned out, when we became fully operational, and we had such good success in the Tehran-Iran operation, which went for over a year and produced something like 1,200 reports, we were inundated with tasking from every agency in the federal government. There's some things about remote viewing that I should tell you in the front end of this because it's necessary for you to know them. In terms of accuracy, a lot is said about accuracy. True accuracy, as I understand it, as both a remote viewer for science as well as a remote viewer for collection, is that my accuracy is based on what they call a figure of merit. They take a particular target, no matter what it might be, a submarine or a plane or whatever, and they decide what are all the possible important questions that could be asked or answered about this particular target. And they list those, they actually type them out. Then they look at my project response, my remote viewing response, and they say, how many statements did he actually make? And how many answered those very important questions? And they list those out. And then they look at all the things I said that was wrong or were fantasizing or had no connection or reliability to the target at all, and they run the whole thing through an algorithm and they come out with a figure of merit. My figure of merit has been pretty much a standard figure of merit. It runs somewhere between 80% and 88%. How many targets have I actually successfully solved? How many problems have I actually solved? That's a much lower percent. That runs somewhere in the 20 to 22 percentile. Now everybody goes, especially my detractors say, oh, 20%. I mean, I could guess and get 20%. I could solve 20% of the cases. Well, what they don't understand is that out of the thousands of targets I did for all the agencies, and my brothers in remote viewing did for many agencies, all of those targets were dead on arrival. They were problems that agencies worked on for anywhere from a year to 2 years and were completely unable to produce any information at all. And most of those problems we solved within a number of hours. In particular, there was a Russian bomber carrying a great deal of intelligence equipment and code books who went down over Zaire in Africa, and every agency in the world and every government in the world, to include terrorist organizations, were looking for this bomber for over a year and a half. They finally kicked it down to that strange unit at the end of the road at Fort Meade, and we found it in 4 hours. That's the kind of work we did. That was actually briefed to a number of reporters by President Carter. When they asked him how he found the plane, he said, we used one of our psychics. The problem was he was holding a file in his arm that said Grill Flame. So Grill Flame died that night, and we became Center Lane. And that's how you deal with leaks. We were Center Lane for a while, and then the managerial authority was assumed from the U.S. Army by the Defense Intelligence Agency, and it became known as Sunstreak. It was Sunstreak until Congress directed the CIA to assume managerial authority for it, because everybody knows human operations belong with the CIA. especially very dark human operations. And the CIA, in spite of the fact they refused to assume responsibility, renamed it Stargate. And Stargate we had 2 years before the movie, so it belongs to us. There are some interesting things that are said about some of the things that we do. One of the great difficulties we had was who was a supporter and who wasn't. There's an assumption, because we worked for every agency in America, that we were highly supported and respected and everybody wanted our work. That's probably half true. The other half is we had no idea who our enemies or detractors were, and they were constantly trying to put us out of business. So going to work every day was more like a knife fight in a phone booth. Half of our targets were not targets at all. We were given blank envelopes. We were distracted with front-end loading. There were a whole lot of efforts to make us look silly and ridiculous in the process, and we thwarted every single effort that was made. There's also some comments made earlier about special access programs. We were the most watchdog special access program in the entire history of the U.S. Army. We had 3 oversight committees, 15 members on each oversight committee, 1 scientific, 1 congressional, and 1 human rights. All were keyed off the Constitution of the United States. We had not a single violation in the entire period of the project, 20 years. And in fact, 2 of the members on some of the oversight committees were Nobel laureates. Now, what's interesting is if you ask the 45 or 50 oversight people at the beginning if they believed in remote viewing or psychic functioning, they'd all say no. At the end, only 2 had changed their minds. But 28 of them supported us through the entire 19 and a half year period and said that they absolutely were sure that something was going on, but they couldn't figure out what it was. Now we'll move on. You know the history. I'm also, before I go a little bit further, I want you to know that I'm the only remote viewer that actually participated in the collection side of the effort for 18 and a half years. I turned the lights on going in as remote viewer 1, and I turned the lights out when it was shut down in November of 1995 by appearing on the Ted Koppel show, where the CIA actually burned us to the American public. That was their way of not managing us. I'm the only psychic in the program that also participated in the scientific research side. I was a research associate at Stanford Research Institute International, and when the lab moved from there to Science Applications International Corporation, I became a research associate there. When the lab closed formally in November of 1995, I moved with the lab to Laboratories for Fundamental Research in Palo Alto, and I'm now a partner in that research effort. We still are doing research, only we're doing it now in not only in America, but in Moscow, in Budapest, Hungary, India, and a number of other places, simply because we get better bang for our research dollar. We also have access to people without having to meet a lot of the human use requirements. Anyway, moving on. I've worked a lot of possible alien targets over the years. I've been doing this for 35 years. I've had lots of experience with alien targets. I could go into a lot of detail about how aliens wear environmental skin suits, and that's why a lot of them look the same. But they don't look the same under the suit cover. They all have the big eyes because they protect the lenses on their normal eyes. I could go into a lot of the very specific technology of their drives and the fact that they have 3 fingers and an opposing thumb in most cases with claws. They are carbon-based. I could go into their food or how they regenerate themselves. I could go into the fact that we hardly ever see an actual alien at all, that the aliens that we experience are the ones that we actually are affected by, or the genetically developed explorer-type beings that are engineered to go forth and collect data for the actual aliens. But this is about full contact, and what it means to us And so I'm going to move into that area first. I believe that RV is a new form of martial arts. It's the use of the mind. The mind is a little explored area other than through neurology and the medical processes, but there's a lot that we can learn with our mind and in the use of our mental facilities, our abilities. I'm going to give you an example of remote viewing, then I'm going to move very quickly into the alien information. Just to give you an idea how remote viewing works, we had an agency that came to us and said, we'd like to give you a lot of money for your research, but we don't know if you're for real. And so what we would like to do is have you give us an example of your targeting ability. And we said, okay, that's fine, you can test us, we'll accept that. But it'll cost you the test cost. And they said, fine, and if you succeed, we'll give you a lot of money for your research. So it seemed like a pretty good deal. And they said, have you ever tracked an individual or a person? And we said, yeah, we've done that a number of times. And they said, well, okay, we would like you to do that, only we're going to control everything. You get nothing. You just get an identification for the target. And what they gave us as an identification is a 3x5 card with a social security number written on it. They said, sometime over the next year, what we'll do is we'll contact you directly by phone on 3 occasions. And when we call you, what we'd like you to do is just describe exactly where the person's standing. I said, okay. And the first time they called me, it was actually midnight, and I was in bed already out in San Francisco. I was out there for a 2-week research project, and I was staying with one of the researchers, Dr. Nevin Lance, at his house in San Francisco at the time. And he woke me up at midnight and said, you have a telephone call, and it was a tasker saying, okay, describe where our target is. And what I drew is this. This is kind of an interesting target. They told me to use the arrow, so I'm going to use the arrow. Oops. That's, if anybody's ever seen this before, pardon me, but this is an example I have to share with everyone. I specifically said that there was a building A that had 7 floors, and the center of the 7th floor top was a facility office, that there was a research facility and a fence down in this area, a large parking lot, and a big city off in this area with a guard check-in gate here. What I was told is everyone who ever sees my drawing automatically says Lawrence Livermore Laboratory West Gate. In fact, where the person was standing at the time, it was midnight. He was standing on the 7th floor in the center office, which is the director's office. This happens to be where the lab where they make atomic weapons. So it's a pretty sensitive facility. The fact that I drew it so almost perfectly and said very little else about it was impressive to them. The next time they called was an afternoon when I happened to be doing some other kind of work, and I didn't get much. It took me 3 minutes to actually draw the target. I said there were a lot of hills, and that there were single power poles, a whole lot of very single power poles everywhere, and there was halos around each of the pole tops, so there must have been movement there, and some kind of a grid that was passing a form of electricity or something. That's the actual target. I didn't get a figure of merit of perfect for this. I got a 99 because I didn't tell him the color of the rental car the guy was driving. Oh, incidentally, in the first targeting, I had to describe the guy, which I did with no problem. It could have been a woman, or it could have been a young man or an older person, but I ended up describing him exactly as he exists. This is a wind generation field in California. Altoona Pass, I think. This was the third time. It was a little bit more complex. I couldn't figure out what this was. I just kept drawing all kinds of weird electronic things, and I said that they were passing some kind of a high-speed element through here. It was producing a lot of power. It was stripping off power in a new way for some kind of new use. It was a whole new form of laser. I kept trying to make it a laser or some kind of an energy device, and I finally came up with a conclusion that it was a hard target that created and destroyed things, so it must be a particle accelerator. And in fact, it was a particle accelerator at Stanford University. He was standing right about where the man is standing in the picture. In actuality, this is a picture taken later to match the target. He actually took the pictures of the original two, one by a helicopter and one from his parked car. Stanford Accelerator. They came and asked me, well, you've done really well on these other 3 targets. Can you tell us something about what the guy's doing? And I actually started drawing what he was doing. I said he was testing some kind of device, and it had very specifically this angle right here. And it turns out the angle in degrees is exactly matches the angle of the equipment. And then out here where the X's are, these are pieces of electronic equipment, different kinds. And these are what I call hard targets, and they were being destroyed or disrupted by the particular engine from the arrow at the top, the wave emitter. The wave emitter itself was constructed inside a van so nobody could see it, and it had something to do with microwaves. And that's the actual emitter in the van that it was in. It's called a microwave generator destructive test. It was in Sandista National Labs. This is a drawing I did of the emitter itself, and that's a picture of what it looks like. And all of this was provided with about 45 minutes of verbalization on a tape, a number of other drawings which have never been released. And in fact, the separate agency that analyzed it said that exactly what it was, and so that they could actually replicate it down to the frequency it was using based on my information. During the process, I said, he had a hobby. This guy has a hobby. And on his lunch breaks and other times when he's not working, he likes to go over to this other place, and I think it's run by DOE, Department of Energy, and it's kind of a fun place where he goes to have experiences. And it has a big tower and a lot of really cool mirrors. And the mirrors are all controlled by computers and all aligned to project something on the tower face. And that's the actual facility. It's 5 miles away from where he was testing his own piece of equipment. But their response to me was, no, he doesn't have a hobby. Our agent doesn't do that. And so I said, well, okay, put it down as a distraction or an AOL, an analytic overlay, and let it go. Well, my reward for getting the target correct was to go to Sandista and actually see the piece of equipment and meet the target. So on the way there, Dr. May and I are driving in a limo down this road, this big dusty road, gravel road in the middle of Sandista Desert. And we pull up over a rise, and there's a blocking gate. And the guard came over and says, I'm sorry, you can't go any further, we're testing. And Ed said, you're testing what? He said, that over there. And there was this tower with all the mirrors, and they were creating a miniature sun on the front of the tower. And Ed yelled, quick, put a bag over Joe's head. He's seeing too much of the thing he wasn't supposed to see. But it was too late. After the test, they raised the arm, and we went down the road and intersected a car coming from the test area, and it was the agent. He had been there at lunch and was watching them test fire it. He likes to go there over his lunch hour because he enjoys it. So we got a huge investment in our research. But this is to show you the degree of information that you can get. That's the only reason I presented it, is to demonstrate the kind of data that you can get about things if you target them completely blind. So how do aliens get here? Well, there's a lot that's said about that. One thing you can say for sure, they don't get here by fire wagon. That's what we use. We use fire wagons to go to the moon, and we're getting ready to use fire wagons to go to Mars. They certainly don't go slower than the speed of light. In three-dimensional movement, speed of light to Pleiades, it would take approximately 1,065 years round trip. That's a really slow trip. In fact, about a quarter of the way there, our civilization would probably advance to the point that we would pass the guys who left originally. And this doesn't include the deacceleration time for flip over and turn around and slowing down to land, because you could expect to attain at least a speed of 90% speed of light. That's also disregarding the many meteoroids that would pass from one end of the ship to the other without seemingly any difficulty. So, maybe they do it in a multi-dimensional way. I've always said that we really don't know that aliens come from other worlds. They could be multi-dimensional entities. They could be visiting us from other dimensions or someplace other than planets. But three-dimensional flight could be anything from 1,000 years to less, or might take no time at all. It's just that we have absolutely no understanding about multiple dimensions. We don't even know what the next dimension will be like in reality. The fact that they interact with us and they appear to be carbon-based would lead me to believe that it's probably not interdimensional. They come from our dimension. So that leaves us with deep space travel by time machine. I've always felt that deep space travelers would always be violating time-space rules, or not actually, but doing it in a slightly different way. Maybe instantaneous travel through a wormhole or something. But they do travel by time machine. The fact that they do completely negates what many scientists have said about alien life. There are some who have said, well, there probably is 1,000 or 1,000,000 other life forms out there, but the amount of time from when they become sentient to when they die of lack of sentience or something is a very short period in the course of time-space. It's a very short blip. It's like lighting up, I think Carl Sagan said it's like a flash of a match in the universe. So we're a flash of a match in the universe, and there may be millions of other matches going off, and he said the probability of 2 matches going off at the same time could be 400 light years apart. So the ability of one of species to meet another species is very remote. Well, if we're traveling by time machine, that just negates all the possibilities that he say would work against us meeting another life form. Because as soon as you conquer time-space, you're able to travel to any life form in existence across time and space. So they probably bend time and space. What do we observe about them? Well, they pop in and out of physical time-space, that's for sure. We see them in their travels doing very erratic things. They appear in different spaces at different times. While in our space, they have an ability to move in ways we don't understand. I'll give you a very good example. I am the only person in the unit, at least in the first 7 years of its existence, that actually targeted a UFO. The UFO was captured in a satellite photograph by an agency photographing an ICBM site. It was captured at 14,000 feet, moving at just under 4,000 miles per hour. It was 300 feet in diameter, and it just made a 90-degree perfect right turn, which would have turned me to jello. But this particular agency had not a clue what this thing was. It was flat as a pancake, I might add, and had a dome. So they sent it over to us, and knowing that I was very good at doing ICBM sites, they said, please have Joe do this target. Actually, they didn't say Joe. They said, have your remote viewer 001 do this target. And so in the course of doing the targeting, I was drawing a very nice replication of the ICBM site. And in the middle of that, I said, wow, I just got a feeling like something passed in front of my face. And the man sitting across from me, my monitor, who was asking questions, he is equally blind to what we're working on as I am, thought, oh, this must be a fast mover, maybe something that was taking pictures. So he said, wouldn't it be cute if Joe drew a picture of our highly classified fast mover? We could throw it in with the other photos and the other drawings. And so he asked me to draw it. And I stopped for a minute, thought, and I drew this big oblique on a piece of paper and put a dome on it and some serrated edging and said it was doing 3,800 miles an hour at 14,000 feet, just made a perfect right turn. And he looked at me and I looked at him, we both cracked a smile, and we rolled that drawing up with the rest of it and sent it back to the agency. Well, it turned out to be correct. That's the only UFO. I did also another drawing in that discussed the power systems and everything, which I can't go into. But it was a very complex drawing, and that's the only UFO target that I'm aware of that was ever targeted by another agency. Speed and trajectory obviously has different meanings to them than they do to us. They're operating from a different set of rules, or they're operating from the same set of rules we are, they just have a better understanding of them, which I think is the case in point. They do wear a biological suit of some kind to protect themselves from our air and our biologic systems, because they can get diseases from us. So they're vulnerable to our atmosphere and biosphere. Aside from the biological interests that they have in us, they've demonstrated a very clear interest in our nuclear weapons and also in our water systems. So they have both on one end of the scale, they have a very high interest in what we do in terms of destructiveness, and they have a very high interest in what we do in terms of ecology, both of which should be interesting us as well. I think they view our weapon systems as being extremely primitive. They probably wonder why we build them. They certainly don't think that we're very intelligent as a result. They think we're very primitive, that we're actually still in a tribal stage. They're friendly, and some aren't, or give the appearance of not being friendly. But you have to understand, they don't understand our view of what friendly and not friendly is. They're coming from an entirely different space where their rules are completely different. The fact that we don't observe some of those rules can make them appear in reaction to being unfriendly. But they're a totally different species, and there's totally different groups among the species. They operate without difficulty in our atmosphere, so they're probably carbon-based and subject to the same things we are. But I don't believe they're from another dimension now. They may use other dimensions as part of their travel as a result of traveling, violating what we believe to be time-space. I'm going to give you some more information here now derived from remote viewing, which I think is more important. I think they can visit a future time, but not a past time. I think one of the basic laws of reality in terms of space-time and violating time-space travel is that you can actually move forward a few seconds or a few minutes, but you can't actually move backwards. That seems to be indicated by them as well. That provides for instantaneous point-to-point travel, which means they don't have to use a spaceship. They could take a section of this room, for instance, and teletransport it somewhere. That's how I believe that they travel. They're using vehicles that are actually not deep space vehicles, but vehicles that can operate within our atmosphere. And they have no necessity for entering actual space for any length of time. That means outer space. One of the forms of communication that operates outside of space-time is psychic functioning. We know from our scientific efforts and studies that communications between human beings as a psychic function transcends the rules. It's instantaneous. It doesn't follow the same rules. So the distance is not material. We did a series of experiments in the early 1980s where we tried to determine what the distance might be in terms of power energy fall off in our ability to communicate. And so what we were actually targeted on were the outer rim planets just prior to the Explorer series satellites being launched. The idea was if we could provide accurate information on the outer rim planets prior to any human being knowing the actuality of that information, it would prove two things. It would prove that we could collect information regardless of distance, and it would also prove that we could collect information that humans didn't know. So we were targeted years before the outer rim planets were reached by the Explorer series satellites. Our accuracy was somewhere in the 80 to 82% range. So they decided they're going to write a paper about how psychic functioning can know things about subjects that humans aren't aware of. And we had to destroy that paper because, in fact, all we did was enter the future to get the information all humans on the planet eventually knew anyway because of the reports from the Explorer series satellites. So we don't know yet if we still violated the future or not. But we do know that we can collect information from a distance as easily as we can from any other point in time space. If that's true, then, and the aliens operate in a psychic fashion, then it's not difficult for them to transfer information in some way that we don't currently understand. Since by nature all humans are psychic, to some extent we're manipulated. That means if they're very powerful psychically, or they have a means for transmitting or emitting information, then we're subject to that information and that manipulation. So a lot of that stuff may appear to us to be something like sudden ideas or concepts. We may have a sudden burst of information where we decide, oh, if we put A with B, we can do something no human's ever done before. It may lead to the violation of time-space travel, these new ideas. Well, these new ideas are not just appearing by accident. We're not having them because we're super educated or our minds are getting better. We're getting them because there is a sharing of intelligence between us and them. All intelligent species in the universe shares information. It's an automatic function. And I think that's been happening for a long time. It's part of the reason that we've progressed as a species. But it is manipulation, even though it's an unconscious manipulation. And it may be a two-way manipulation. In other words, things that we learn and things that we know are unconsciously being shared with other intelligent species that may not be as progressed as we are. So how does that work? Well, I think human development is cyclic. Over any extended period of time, we grow in spurts, and we get information from other entities. Likewise, we share information with other entities. That's been happening with our ancestors, and it's certainly going to happen with future humans. So it's an ongoing cyclic thing. It's part of our growth. So we're dependent on aliens. Aliens are dependent on us in some way. I think all intelligent species are interconnected, especially if it's carbon-based. Our intuitive creativity is passed to us by our neighbors as we are able to use it. In other words, if we have the tools to understand the innovativeness of the thought, then we're capable of applying it. If we haven't reached the point in our development that we're able to understand it yet, it will lie fallow. So as we grow spiritually and intelligently, we become infested with more ideas. This is an important point because it means that we're tied to our alien neighbors as just assuredly as they're tied to us. And that means that they have an investment in us. That means that things that could happen will happen to all of us. Our desire to enter and explore space, or our knowledge that we're not alone in the universe, is part of the overall plan that all intelligence is subjected to. In fact, there's a lot of talk about the discovery of possible ruins on Mars, as an example. It's been my belief for many years, as I've collected a lot of this data, that we are in fact the survivors of the race or species that actually occupied Mars at one time. Mars was probably a viable and lovely planet, very much like Earth, and something happened, and it had to be evacuated. So what happened is we came here, the survivors came here anyway, and we had to begin again. Historically, if you read some of forbidden archaeology by Cremo and Thompson, what you'll see is there's evidence of de-evolution as well as evolution. So there's a possibility that there were advanced intelligences on this planet a long, long time ago that devolved, simply because they had no means of recreating what they had the technology for. It'd be sort of like us having the ability to build cars with a factory, and then suddenly relocating to a planet and not even having a factory. So how do you build a car? It doesn't happen. But there are some things we can do with the level of our intelligence. We'd be able to communicate along great distances, and we would appear to be as gods to many that wouldn't understand healing, for instance. And I think that's possibly what happened here. The other evidence that I think points to it is the fact that humans have no great love for this planet in reality. I'm not talking about everybody here, I'm talking about in general. The human species is tearing this planet apart. We're mining it for everything we can get. We have no conscious responsibility for reducing population. It's basically just a place that we're using until we can get off planet again. And that's an interesting thought in itself, that we have this tremendous drive as a species to leave, to go out into the stars. Where did that come from? It's part of our genetics. Certainly, if not from the old time, from the new time. And as more intelligent species arise within the universe, the faster our development will happen. In other words, there's an acceleration that occurs. It's a self-feeding process. And we can actually see that in our science. Where are the ideas coming from? I think they're actually coming out of that manipulation. I have a theory based on the information I have, and that starts with the Big Bang. At the Big Bang, everything expanded. The universe expanded, and all the galaxies within the universes began expanding. And as they expanded for 5.5 billion years, suddenly intelligent life reached the point where we are. And that's somewhere around this ring. So as we expanded outward from the core out to here, that represents 5.5 billion years on a flat plane called our galaxy. And we became intelligent. And somewhere within there is the dotted line represents where we are possibly today since our beginning of intelligence. And that's probably the end of our intelligence. Maybe it's 500,000 years or 500 million years, I don't know, but somewhere in there it's going to begin and end. And ours has begun, so somewhere in there it's going to end. Well, I call that sort of the sweet spot, sweet zone. Well, within that zone, there's a whole raft of stars in that ring. And I think intelligent life, if it's developed in any of the stars where there could be planets like ours, are going to fall within that ring, because they're the ones that have had the time to develop. That's what the ring looks from a side view as it lies in our galaxy. So it's a perfect zone for life, perfect zone for intelligence. So here's the idea. If the Earth's sun lies within that ring, and SETI's looking into the core or looking away from the core, they're not going to find a whole lot of intelligent life. Because I don't think that's where intelligent life lies. I think intelligent life lies on that peripheral, to the right and left. If you're laying on a flat ring and the core's to your feet, it's going to be to your peripheral. So where SETI should be pointing their collection equipment is either right or left in the plane of the galaxy, not to the core or away from the core. I think they're more likely to find intelligent life that way, if they do. As you saw in John Alexander's one slide where he showed the electromagnetic spectrum, there's a very small, tiny piece of that spectrum where radio waves lie. What's interesting to me is that SETI would pick radio waves. If they want to know what they were like, aliens were like when they were broadcasting in radio like we do today, that would be a perfect place to look. But that's not where they are. They're communicating in a different fashion altogether, and I sure wouldn't be looking at that range of the spectrum. I'd be probably looking at how does psychic functioning exchange material information, and what frequencies does that operate at, or how does it operate? That's where the information is, and that's where the people are. Now I'm going to show you something from Remote Viewing Secrets, which is my book. This is called Local Sidereal Time. What's interesting about this is a view of classic psychic functioning and the most accurate time for functioning. Local sidereal time talks about the wobble of the Earth and how it faces the core of the universe. The local sidereal time is different from regular time because it has to do with the sun and its effects on the Earth. And local sidereal time makes a perfect sine wave over the course of a year. It starts at local sidereal time here, for instance, will be a specific time that backs up 2 minutes and so many seconds every day. When you're at 1530 local sidereal time, which is precisely there, the probability of getting psychic information at 4 sigma better than normal occurs. Isn't that interesting? We know that from looking at over 10,000 remote viewings. If you look at the back side of that, that's the front side. The high one is the front side. That's the direction in which we're traveling from. We're going this direction, traveling from. This would be looking at the direction we're traveling in. You get, you get a double increase in accuracy in psychic functioning. If you look towards the core of the universe, guess what you get? Zip. Isn't that interesting? And you know what? This particular graph matches exactly the one I just showed you. So there is a psychic connection between us and alien life. There's a psychic connection between us and all intelligent life on that ring. And we're learning from them in an unconscious way. And we're using it because it's innovative ideas that pop into our heads. So they're already with us, they're already sharing. The parts that we don't understand are the rules of the game. We don't know what the rules are, they do. So aliens are using some form of subquantum emissions for communications instantaneously across space-time. They can talk to their world. We're being automatically altered at a DNA level that we can't stop. It's happening on a minute-to-minute, second-to-second basis. We're being affected in everything we do, and it's because we just happen to be an intelligent species. In all probability, because they're carbon-based and because they think a lot like us and they operate a lot like us, they're going to be looking a lot like us. They're probably going to be bipedal. They're probably going to have very small, the ability to manipulate small objects. The things that will be different are the things that are mediated by environment. For instance, if they come from a world that's completely covered with water, they are not going to be breathing with lungs. They'll be breathing through gills. If they come from a place where they actually have to chase their food across the table to eat it, they'll probably have claws. It doesn't mean they're entirely different from us. They probably think very similarly to us. They probably have the same ideas, the same aspirations that we do. All of our previous contacts and current contacts are probably with drones designed or engineered for deep space missions. The real aliens are not like those we currently deal with. The real aliens are standing back because they know that we're not progressed to a point where we would entertain an interaction. In most cases, what would happen if an alien suddenly appeared in the room is about half the people would probably try to back through the walls. They know that. They understand that. They're probably 500,000 years ahead of us, so they're just not entertaining full contact yet. We're too dangerous. We're uncontrolled. We don't know the rules. There's at least 3 different species who are already collecting materials and samples from our planet. They're aware of each other, and they all follow the rules. When they decide to make contact, it will be both pleasant as well as unpleasant. That doesn't mean we'll be harmed. It just means that it's going to be entirely on their terms. Not any of the contact will be on our terms. And the reason why is because in order to go from here to there, When you start playing there are very specific rules. And we're not the kind of species that follows rules yet. I mean, we can't follow rules between different counties. We don't follow rules certainly between different countries. So when they make contact, they make full contact, it's going to be on their terms. And there are certain long-established and well-entrenched laws regarding interstellar entities and how we will be required to act if we want to play there. And we're not going to be given any choice in the matter. If we're willing to accept those rules and entertain those rules and change ourselves to meet the requirements, then we will be allowed into the interstellar community. If we're not, then we won't be. We'll be earthbound forever until we completely gut this world and have nowhere else to go. When will we make contact? Alien life is similar to ours because of the similarity of our DNA. They're carbon-based entities, so they look a lot like us. Physically, there'll be some minor changes for obvious reasons. We can assume then they have the same passions, wants, desires, necessities. They probably have the same interest in things like spirituality, other things. The difference is going to be they're going to be slightly more understanding of those things than we are. But we can learn a lot from that, and we should be willing to learn a lot from that. It would be sort of like a child meeting their parent. It probably isn't going to take place for some time because we're still dealing with their drones. That's very clear. I think they're waiting for the end of human tribalism. That's when we murder each other off in wars and things. They're certainly waiting for human population to peak, and it will peak. It'll reach a point where it's no longer sustainable above that point. Anything above that point will die, and anything that we can't support will die, and we'll be forced to regulate our population. They're waiting for us to mature to that point, and they're waiting for a desired contact of peace and our need to understand more. I extracted some comments from a document here. It's in German, but I extracted the comments because I think they're applicable and important. There's evidence that DNA can be influenced and reprogrammed by words and frequencies. That's without cutting out specific gene splices. 10% of our DNA is used for building proteins. The subset, or 90%, is junk, or was considered junk. Russian researchers have learned to use language, the rules of language, the syntax of language, to actually manipulate DNA. They found that the alkaline of our DNA follows a regular grammar and has sets of rules just like language. Isn't that interesting? It doesn't matter what the language is, by the way. So human languages probably didn't appear on the planet by accident. They're probably inherent within our DNA. That means it's something like alien language. They managed to exemplify or modulate certain frequency patterns onto a laser ray and capture DNA information. So there's no decoding necessary. And they proved through experimentation that living DNA in living tissue, not vitro, will always react to a language modulated laser ray if the right frequencies are used. I'm just going to let you read that. It's all part of the same. Here's a very good example. They actually transformed a frog embryo to a salamander embryo by transmitting the DNA information pattern through the embryo itself. There were no side effects or difficulties encountered, like when cutting or splicing a DNA. What that means is they changed the embryo of a frog into a salamander simply by passing the DNA, modulating the DNA frequency through the embryo. During the DNA research, they found that DNA can actually produce magnetized wormholes, which are equivalent to the Einstein-Rosen bridges in the vicinity of black holes. In other words, they're passing information beyond time-space, or outside of time-space, along great and vast differences. So our DNA can be modified by faster than light information. And remote viewing or psychic functioning does exactly the same thing. A lot of you don't know, if a queen ant is taken from a colony and you take the queen ant, put it in a box, and you fly it to Massachusetts, the colony will continue to operate as normal until you kill the queen ant. As soon as you kill the queen ant, the colony destructs, falls apart. So the queen is in communication with the colony no matter where she is, regardless of distance or time-space. That is probably the hive mind, or the way, part of the rules by which aliens operate. Unless we're willing to consider a hive mind as an appropriate rule to follow, we're probably not going to get anywhere off the planet. Hypercommunications is encountered when one suddenly gains access to information that's outside your knowledge base. In other words, a good idea. So we're getting both the DNA change as well as the jump in information. There's an interesting complication. When they irradiated DNA samples with a laser light, a wave pattern was formed on a screen. When they removed the DNA sample, the DNA pattern stayed. That's called the phantom DNA effect. They actually have a name for it. Isn't that interesting? Well, I believe this phantom DNA effect can not only be done with a laser, it can be done with the power of a star. So every planet with intelligence circling a star has the ability to pass the phantom DNA from one star to the next. They use there's a lot of controversy over this next paragraph where they use random number generators to look at large events and how it affects the consciousness of humans. And there's usually a increase in the non-randomness of the generator when a significant event happens, which creates an effect. And so humans in their consciousness become more focused or less focused depending on what they're paying attention to. All intelligent life may share a similar beginning, relates to the Big Bang. All intelligent life shares similar DNA if it's carbon-based. All consciousness may interact, given that the differences in time isn't too great. And by time, I mean differences in our development, how far along in our development we are. Distance may have no effect on the exchange of the information or the speed of the transmission because it's all super light speed. All intelligent life shares similar goals. They're going where we're going, and we're going where they're going, whether we want to or not. And all intelligent life may share similar passions. So resentment as well as love can be the same in both aliens and us. And all intelligent life may be spiritually similar, or at least the quest for a God may be the same. Certainly the understanding is going to be the same. And that's an example of a couple aliens. And I have a couple minutes. I can take probably one or two questions.
Hello, my name is Armando Lopez, a chemical technician. My question is on remote viewing. How hard would it be to the general public to start remote viewing themselves, and how long would it take for you to actually get a correct remote viewing object, like if you want to?
Well, every human being we ever tested in remote viewing has the ability to do some remote viewing. So you don't have to learn anything, you just have to follow the protocol. Be totally blind to the target. You can produce information. The problem is remote viewing is talent-based. It's very similar to like golf or tennis, something like that. If you have a very natural talent for it, you've been being psychic your whole life, you're probably going to do very well. If you haven't used psychic functioning, or if you haven't paid attention to your ability psychically over your lifetime, then you're probably not going to do as well as someone that has. Now, you can practice a lot, you're probably going to get a little bit better, but usually people that haven't used it their whole life and you know, they'll be able to go out and play golf on weekends.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Joe. Good talk. Really enjoyed it. Question, if remote viewing is as powerful as you've said it is, and I believe it is, why did they shut it down? I would think, or is it continuing now and we just don't know about it?
When the CIA was directed by Congress to assume managerial authority, they had just got through a 6-month fight with Congress and the Senate over MK Ultra. That was the use of LSD for interrogation purposes. They got a really big black eye from that. And so right after they finished that war with Congress, Congress turned right around and said, we want you to assume managerial authority for psychics. And the CIA said, not on your best day. Now the problem they had is they had been tasking and using the psychics for 19 and a half years. And to say no suddenly wasn't a good idea. So Congress said, well, you're going to do it because we're in charge and you're not. And so the CIA said, well, okay, but we're going to review it first. And of course, it all fell apart in the review. The fact that they allowed the review team to review one box of material that they selected, they weren't allowed to talk to anybody in the project, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, guaranteed its failure.
Could it be that Congress didn't want any remote viewing done on them?
It's likely because remote viewing, psychic functioning is a double-edged sword. You not only know what it is you're targeted against, you know why you're being targeted. Guys at the street level aren't allowed to know that stuff. And I can say this, it started in October of '78, the project did. In July of '79, the CIA was already saying, we need a defense against this. We're totally defenseless. And the way we can do it is we can do things to remote viewers while they're remote viewing, and if we can make them purposely fail, it'll tell us by inference something about how it works. The difficulty is, to date, it's never failed. It fails enough on its own, don't mistake that. But the fact that you can't make it fail is significant.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome. One more question.
Hi, I had a question regarding using remote viewing for financial purposes. Like you mentioned, it can be like fairly difficult to make it work. So how can you make it work for something like financial markets and investing? Is that a practical application of remote viewing?
Sure. Can you use it for financial markets and applications? Absolutely. You can use it for the stock market. There's a form of remote viewing called associative remote viewing. That's where you assign different kinds of photographs to specific things in the market. And then you say, on this date, what will be the highest stock? And you do a remote viewing of the picture, and then on that date, the person goes down a row of pictures and says, here's the result, and hands that picture to the remote viewer. If it worked, they should have been handed the right picture that equated to the stock that they should have bought 2 weeks earlier. It does work. There was a series of silver investments done by us at Stanford, and at Stanford, not university, the lab at Stanford. Over a 1-year period, we made 19 out of 19 picks in the silvers market and earned enough money to buy all the instruments and uniforms for a high school. So the only reason we quit is the guy who was supporting it with his money pulled out because he didn't think we could do 20 out of 20.
Thanks.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you very much.